Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Donald Wallenfang. Thank you for joining me on this live stream entitled Why Why Spiritual Being is the Necessary Condition of Possibility for Material Being. So it took me a second to remember. It's early in the morning where I am. So, welcome to this live stream. Thinking more together about spiritual being. What is spirit? What is spirit in relation to matter? This is a very important question for philosophy and, moreover, theology. Giving a rational account of spiritual being is absolutely necessary to make any sense of the relationship between form and matter, for example, what we mean by form, what is the substantial constitution of a form in relation to matter. So even for Aristotelian hylomorphism, to think spirit is necessary to fill out what we mean by morphe in Greek, or form. But even more for a Platonic view of things, we need to think in terms of um, the formal substances that essentially are spirit rather than material. So even for basic general metaphysics, to use the language of spirit helps us delineate further that difference between form and matter in general. But then when we're talking about persons, about a human subject or an angelic subject, or by way of analogy, divinity, who is God? What is God? What is God in terms of metaphysical substance? If not material, then what do we say God is? What do we say an angel is? What do we say a human being is in addition to the body and not only the body? So these are the things we want to think about together on this topic of why spiritual being is the necessary condition of possibility for material being. So I'm going to take commentary from my 2017 book, Human and Divine Being, a study on the theological anthropology of Edith Stein. And still in chapter 2, still thinking about spirit. I could think about this for the rest of my life and be quite content. What is spirit? What is spiritual being in relation to matter, in relation to material being, in relation to atoms, the periodic table of elements, all these elements? What is spiritual being? Without spiritual being, material being would not exist, because every instance of matter is determined by an antecedent spiritual form. First comes form, then comes matter. Just as act always precedes potency, spirit always precedes matter. Potential material beings are conceived according to the generating power of actual forms. And this language is very important. The generating power of actual forms. Thinking of the word genesis, thinking of beginning. The beginning of a being starts with spiritual form, always preceding any kind of material configuration of material components of being. But it is form that assigns the configuration, that assigns the architecture to matter. Form is the actual causal agency of matter. Again, very important language. Form, what is form? The actual, having to do with act rather than potency. Actual, causal, having to do with cause and not just effect. Agency, agere. An action is taking place, a work is taking place that is shaping matter according to this or that. Again, configuration, mold, form, gestalt, character of being. The rock has a quite different kind of gestalt than the person. And why these different kinds of being? We ask why. We're inquiring into the origin or the cause of this particular being and that particular being. And all of these beings, inclusive, together, what is the cause of all of this finite being and life and movement? All this interconnected forms of being. And spirit is the necessary actual causal agency of matter, without which matter would not assume any coherent and subsistent, stable shape of being. Form is the ontological progenitor and adhesive of beings. Form. Form is not made of atoms. If form is not made of atoms, what is it? Substantially, metaphysically, what is form if not matter? What is the immateriality of form? We say it is a kind of spiritual being. And if we're talking about an impersonal form, like the geometric shapes, circle, square, triangle, or various numbers, or just ideas themselves, concepts, these are objective spiritual being. But a person, like a human being that has soul, this is subjective spiritual being that animates a body, that we say this body is alive because it's united to the spiritual core of the soul. This body is human, this body is intelligent, this body is rational, this body is loving because of spirit, because of the soul, which is the form of the body, the subjective living form of the material body. Form is the ontological progenitor and adhesive of beings. Why do beings keep their shape, keep their form, stay what they are over the course of this flux of time between the no longer and the not yet, hovering in their being above non-being? What gives them being? What keeps them in being? What makes them this being rather than that one? Form. It's an adhesive. It's a bonding property in relation to the matter beyond the activity of electrons that bond various atoms and molecules together, and of course the protons and neutrons in the nuclei of the atoms. But this adhesive of beings, in terms of their formal, peculiar formal constitution, is due to spirit, is due to spiritual form. Without self-effusive formal being that generates the diversity of forms and figures throughout the universe, there would be no existence, no beings to fill the universe. Matter as such is radically potential being because it can assume a countless array of forms. What determines a specific instance of material being is the formal causation we call spiritual being. Formal causation acts in relation to the potency of matter. Every material existent exists as a molded being. It is molded according to a predetermined form that lends matter its capacity to adhere and persist in its specific ontic constitution. Its material constitution, its immediate sensible constitution. Formal spiritual being is what imparts being to matter, and it is divine being that gives being to all finite existence, all finite beings. So, yes, ultimately we're getting at the causality we call God, we call divinity, a pure act that is generating these finite forms and is inscribing them within this material world of being. But there's no material being without spiritual being first, without form first. We cannot imagine at the most microscopic level unformed matter. Any speck, any particle has a definite shape, a definite character, a definite formal constitution. And we have this in our molecular theories about, and atomic theories about the atom. There's these three different components: protons, neutrons, electrons. And they're not all the same kind of component. They're different. And precisely because of their difference, they hold together in a unified form and a unified element, depending on the amounts, the number of protons, neutrons, and electrons in an atom. And so we have these various elements that are constantly changing. But what is the cause of their temporary stability of form? Every speck of matter has this temporary stability of form. And this is what we want to think about. The cause is spirit. We say generically form, but the causal agency, the volition involved to make a thing what it is the will of God, the will of divinity, divine providence. Every material existence, every material being exists as molded being, as formed being. And every form begs its personal causal agency. We ourselves are persons, we are rational agents, we have will, we have freedom, we have morality, and these things don't evolve from that which does not have will, freedom, and morality. The causal agency of this whole network of being, this whole metaphysical matrix of being in life, itself must be personal, must be volitional, must be free. And this is what we say in theology, and even first in philosophy about God. To access the peculiar nature of spiritual being, we need a special kind of logic that is different from a plain commonsensical logic of commerce, of economics, of supply and demand, of dealing with material goods and material being through the sense data of natural science. These things all have their rightful place as we pursue what is real, but we need a kind of logic that inverts the gaze of the investigator toward that which is not being noticed typically. How do we notice what tends to go unnoticed within thought, within all of our scientific investigation? We need a special kind of logic for this grand inversion to happen. And it's called this logic of the double negative, the logic of the cross. It is a paradoxical logic that allows us to access that which is doing the investigation, namely subjectivity. Subjectivity is a function of spirit and not pure matter and motion. The spiritual core of the human being, the soul, utilizes the material medium of the body that the world would give itself to the soul. Through all of this material manifestation of spirit, there's a sacramentality of the cosmos, of being, of the world. And this logic of the cross allows us to invert the exteriority of perception into an interiority of perception. And it is only through an interiority of perception that we're able to perceive spiritual being as such, the being that we are most fundamentally. So, following these general contours of this logic of the cross, Edith Stein's new methodology can be mapped directly onto such paradoxical logic. Stein writes that, quote, the material element must be transformed in order to be revitalized. Out of something, something else has come to be. That which was there prior to the transformation is there no longer as the same that it was before, nor has it been reduced to nothing. It has acquired a new being, a being in a new form, in the thing into which it has been transformed, end quote. From her book, Finite and Eternal Being, there. This is the case with organic evolution and growth that is patently observable in the natural world. The material element must be transformed in order to be revitalized. Life subsists and is perpetuated precisely by this process of transformation. One being gives rise to another by being transformed. The seed is transformed in order for the stalk to sprout forth. The cell is transformed in order for the process of mitosis to occur. The person is transformed in order for a community to grow. Stein recognizes the evolutionary character of living existence, whereby each individual becomes, as it were, a victim of its vital task. Each individual living being has a Lebensaufgabe in German, a vital task, a vital role and function that it is doing within this organic whole, within this ecosystem of life. This process in which life begets life displays the logic of the double negative, the logic of the cross. A seed dies in order to redeem the hidden life of the sapling. A cell dies in order to call forth the entelechy of the full organism. An individual ego dies in order to participate in radical solidarity with a communion of other selves. The silhouette of the life of spiritual being serves as the impetus and driving force of all such life forms that become victims of their vital tasks. In sum, this is none other than the movement of redemption, cosmic redemption, we think with Maximus the Confessor, this cosmic liturgy in which all of these living beings, by becoming victims of their vital tasks, perpetuate life according to the wholeness of its drama. This is the movement of redemption which effects an irrevocable transfiguration of being. Materiality yields to the redemptive work of divine spirit, with it, in and through it. Spiritual being functions as the vital template for created being. And all of this self-giving proves to be the primordial language of the cosmos, inbuilt, inscribed, even when spoken from the heart of the rebellious cosmic resistance to such a noble vocation. I have in my mind the image of a young bird just learning to fly, and that moment where the bird has to risk all of its being to take flight in the air. It hasn't done this before. It's been earthbound or nest bound in its nidation. But the moment it flaps its wings and becomes airborne is a new event of being. And this would not be possible without all of the risk and the daring involved to set out to fly. And for us human beings, we get this sense. We have a very definite sense of our common vocation to become a living gift of self to the point of abandonment in relation to the other, that the other might live, that life may go on, and my own being must give way to this cosmic surge of life. It's like I must get out of the way so that life might have its way. My own being is living. My own being is part of this whole of life. But individually itself is not the whole. The life that I have, that I enjoy, that I live, is in relation to this cosmic vocation to live in the face of the threat of death. Life is a constant resistance to non-being, to unbecoming, to null being, to nothingness. Life is a rebellion against nothingness. Living being is this way. But it's a paradoxical kind of being. Because life is temporary for an individual organism, but life altogether, symbiotically across this ecosystem of organisms in this biosphere, we have a network of life, and every individual in some way contributes to the perpetuation of life. So just kind of thinking out loud here in terms of life and the self-giving that is possible for rational, personal, spiritual beings like ourselves. Self-giving generates life. It does not curtail it or subtract from it. But paradoxically, self-giving gives life. I think of becoming a father or a mother. And this is something a lot of people are afraid to do. People may fall in love, may love someone, and may even marry, but these days, how so many people seem reluctant to want to become father and mother, want to have a child, want to have many children. Populations are declining. They are waning in number in different places in the world, not everywhere, but Europe for sure. Many places in the United States, there's not as many children as there were before. And so it is this fear or an attraction to the vocation of the self-giving, because to become father and mother is to be involved thoroughly in this drama of self-giving. My being is no longer my own, but it gives way. It yields to the emergence of a new one, the child. And now my life is at the service of this child, of raising her, of loving her, of being with her, of nourishing her. My life is at the service of her. It's no longer living for myself alone. And hopefully this already had begun with in relation to my wife, my spouse. that my life is no longer my own, but now it's our life together. And it's a discerning, what should we do together? How should we go about life to the end until we die? This is a marvelous thing within our humanity. So the concrete expression of the self-giving is especially in marriage, in fatherhood and motherhood. There's other kinds of vocations like religious life, like priesthood, where we have a spiritual fatherhood or a spiritual motherhood being exercised, but it is known, it's apprehended only in relation to the natural concrete expressions of fatherhood and motherhood, of family life. So the self-giving, it's very thick with reality. And phenomenologically, we can describe when and where it's happening and when and where it's not happening. Self-giving, we mean something very definite by this expression. Self-giving proves to be the primordial language of the cosmos. Every star is giving itself, and so its light shines. It illuminates the darkness. All of these processes, these very natural processes that proceed according to the inbuilt laws of nature, the architecture of the cosmos, the ordered cosmos. The law that is inbuilt, that is even instinctive, we can describe as self-giving, self-donating. Animals themselves do this naturally. They grow, they develop, and each one becomes a victim of its vital task for the sake of the offspring, this procreative impetus that is charged within the whole of these living networks of being. So we think about the work of Edith Stein and also that of her good friend Hedwig Conrad Martius, who also studied phenomenology with her, with Edmund Husserl, was part of the Göttingen Circle. Hedwig Conrad Martius, who lived from 1888 to 1966. She wrote many works also, many of which are not translated into English. They're all originally in German. But the work of her friend Conrad Martius informs Stein's intuitive presentation of spiritual life. In both her books Potency and Act and Finite and Eternal Being, Stein is found quoting extensively from the work of Conrad Martius. One such key passage concerning pneumatology can be found in the course of Stein's depiction of the basic forms of actual being as opposed to passive being. In contrast to corporeal being alone, Conrad Martius describes spiritual being and the spiritual potential for human being as follows, quote, "On the level of spiritual being, a thus substantiated corporeal entity is in turn capable of transcending itself in a selfless and non-fixed manner." Okay, so first of all, what is Hedwig Conrad Martius saying there about a substantiated corporeal entity on the level of spiritual being? So she's talking about human being, especially human being here. We have this capacity to transcend ourselves as spirit and matter, as soul and body, through this selfless and non-fixed manner of being. Every act of love testifies to spirit, because genuine acts of love sacrifice something of the self. They sacrifice one's time, one's money, one's possessions, one's body, one's being. They cede the place of the self through the act of hospitality, making room for the other, And again, the most concrete um, image of this is maternity, is motherhood, where the mother herself in her body and soul makes room for the little one within herself. This is incredible. And as human beings have the privilege to contemplate the meaning and the meaningfulness of something like maternity, the metaphysics of maternity and the meaning of maternity. So fatherhood also is called to this vacating of the self, of this self-concerned, self-absorbed taking up of space of the body. But when a father holds his child in his arms, he turns his body also into a kind of nest. There is nidation also with the body of the father. The father comports his body in such a way, often through discomfort, to make a peaceful space for the child to take his place in well-being, in life. So many acts of love testify to spiritual being. This is what Hedwig Conrad Martius is getting at. When we have a substantiated corporeal entity like a human body on the level of spiritual being capable of transcending itself in a selfless, non-fixed, the German unfixiert manner, and purified and freed from the mass of the limited self, especially of the body, to give itself freely to others in vital participation. Every act of love performed in and through the body is this expression of spirit. It is a catharsis. The body undergoes catharsis through every act of love, a purification, a liberation from the mass that takes up space of the limited self. The movement of love, when the body moves according to the rhythms of love, the choreography of love, we have something very beautiful coming into view. Very beautiful, being heard, perceived, felt. To give itself freely to others in vital participation. This giving itself freely through a transcendent and ecstatic movement we call love promotes life, promotes this collective vital participation. The supra-earthly, however, this transcendent movement of being, where we move from earth to heaven, you could say. Every act of love is a movement from earth to heaven, a lifting of earth into the domain of heaven. This is the realm of fully unfolded being, she says. A being which is actual, active, acting, dramatic through and through, and thus abiding in the splendor of perfect selflessness, conjoined with the highest possible plentitude of reality, abiding in the splendor of perfect selflessness, lightness, and brightness. So we have this English word glory. Glory describes the phenomenality, the lived experience of being illuminated. And even if we're working with metaphor to some degree, which we are, the metaphor is based on the natural phenomena of radiation, the radiating light from the stars, including the sun, most especially the sun for our solar system, And what we mean by light, um, as earth dwellers. So light in natural science, we can talk about the photon, we can talk about the wave, the particle of the photon, measure it in different ways. And this is in terms of the physics of light. But the meaning and meaningfulness of light is something much more than just waves and particles. It is the condition of possibility for seeing, for life, for growth, for movement, for fluctuation of temperature, for wind, for waves, for everything, all of these natural phenomena happening on Earth, in Earth. The sun makes it possible. The light leads the way. The light empowers the process. So when Hedwig Conrad Martius is talking about spiritual being vis-a-vis the metaphor, the analogy of light, uh, it's very helpful because light is the driving force of the movements of living beings on Earth, beginning with photosynthesis, what all this plant life are doing, photosynthesis. And because of plant life that emits oxygen, and then we have this animal life that breathes respiration, the citric acid cycle in animals. And again, the symbiotic relationship between all these various organic forms of being, living forms of being. But without light, there's no life. Simply put, life is based on the sine qua non, that without which not, of light. So we can think, moreover, of not only biological living, which is incredible, but the spiritual living that transcends that of bios. And the New Testament Greek has a word for life, we translate in English as life, that transcends that of bios. And that word is zoe. Zoe. This comprehensive understanding of life, in which oftentimes bios will be sacrificed for the sake of zoe. Life will be sacrificed for the sake of life. A greater, yes, more enveloping, more comprehensive notion of life, zoe. This life in the spirit, as St. Paul talks about it. Life in the spirit, where the disciple of the living one dies in order to live. It's a very paradoxical meaning because it's saying that if there is no authentic, intentional self-giving of the person, life withers up. But as Jesus says, unless the seed dies, the shoot does not spring forth. But for the seed to die, it's a greater participation in the life of the unfolding organism. And that's how Conrad Martius talks about spiritual being. It unfolds. This fully unfolded being which is actual through and through, abiding in the splendor of perfect selflessness, which involves the annihilation of the self, but not the annihilation of the self. This is why it's a paradox. To live in a selfless, self-giving way, I actually become my full self, my true self, my authentic self. Without the self-giving, I don't become myself. I don't know myself. I don't know my vocation. Myself withers up without giving itself away through love. Myself will self-destruct. It will become extinct. without living into the vocation of self-giving. And this is universal for all human beings. And we are we're hitting upon this universality of this common vocation of self-giving through phenomenological description and metaphysical explanation. Lightness, brightness, selflessness. This is the highest possible plentitude of essential reality, essential because spiritual. What is of the essence of being is spirit. Matter is simply a residue of the essentiality of spirit. Matter is a medium of spirit to express itself between spirits. The human body serves the greatest purpose, not simply to perpetuate the conatus essendi of the individual being, not simply as a medium of food and drink, of nutrition and hydration, for the sake of metabolism of the biological organism. But the body finds itself summoned to a much more noble vocation, to express the intentions of the soul, to be a medium of love, of gift. When the body itself is not just a membrane of consumption, but a medium of gift, a medium of love, then we have a real animated human body. Living to the degree of giving, living to the degree of giving itself away in service of the other person who faces me, big or small, abled or disabled. There's so much giving to be done, so much loving to be made. Conrad Martius points to the possibility of a corporeal entity transcending itself, that is, exceeding its limits toward a kind of existence that gives itself over for the good of the other. In her book Potency and Act, Edith Stein writes, quote, Conrad Martius stresses, in speaking of the meaning of the word in Latin spiritus, that the essence of what is spiritual is that it breathes. Again, even through the metaphor of respiration, yes, the biological respiration, but spiritual being breathes as spirit. It spreads its essence about itself as an aura, in German Hauch. This breathing out, this exhaling, this spiriting, in German Geisten, wherein the being gives itself away by radiating the glory of spiritual being. As Saint Irenaeus of Lyon put it, the glory of God is the human being fully alive in this life of spirit, in this pattern of self-giving, where the paradigmatic is the real. This corresponds to breathing in, inhaling, or bodying, Leben. So the Geisten corresponds to the Leben, wherein the being takes possession of its very fullness and conserves itself. Okay, so Edith Stein in Potency and Act is saying this. Maybe I should draw a depiction of what she's getting at here. So we have, in German, she's saying, there's a Geisten. And this, she's saying, is the exhalation of spirit in relation to spirit. And it is a movement from the interior to the exterior, toward the interior of the spiritual other, the other person. So we have a spiriting. The person spirits him or herself. in relation to the other. To spirit is to move from interiority to interiority through exteriority. So this is what this Geisten Stein is talking about, is a kind of exhalation, a Geisten toward the other. But also she's talking about a Leiben, or bodying. So the person is doing, the human being is doing both things, which is an inhaling and reciprocal inhaling of the otherness of the other, to breathe in the other, and this is a bodying, and altogether this is possible through the phenomenon of empathy. So again, think of maternity as our best concrete image of what Stein is getting at here. The mother in relation to the child within her own body, and thinking about the origin of the child, let's just say in a marriage relationship between a man and a woman, and the love of the man and the woman is expressed most intimately through the conjugal act, and the man enters into the body of the woman because she invites him, and she envelops his body. The beauty of the conjugal act, which is only really perceived through modesty. This can't be put on a screen and understand what it is. It's entirely mysterious, and it takes place within the sacramental bond of marriage. To understand this in a fully Catholic way. And so we have the conjugal act that gives rise to the conception of the child within the body of the woman in the fallopian tube, and the migration of the little one, the newly conceived infant, into the uterus, and the implantation into the endometrium, the uterine lining, and this process of nidation of the infant in his mother's womb, and he grows and he develops within her. And so when we think of the conjugal act, when we think of the conception of the child, we have this going on to the highest degree. And it is the basis for all other genuinely human acts that bear the resonance of divinity. Maternity itself, again, is this image of creatio ex nihilo, of God, according to the Jewish Kabbalah, of God hollowing God's self out so that the universe could take its place. This divine hospitality, this divine empathy, which continues through the salvation history and the plan of God to redeem us and to build us into this kingdom of God, in the words of Jesus. So we have a spiriting, an exhalation, a transcendence of the interiority of the self through this exterior medium of the in-between others toward the interiority of the other, and an interpenetration of interiorities through the experience of empathy, where the experience of the self takes place in the experience of me, as the child takes its place, its being within the being of his mother. And then the process of birth, of labor and birthing, again, a renewal of the spiriting of the other, a giving up of the other, a generation of life that continues through this bodying forth, that in turn will exercise both the exhalation and the inhalation of being. So what we have here is a correspondence between soul, what the soul is doing, and what the body is doing in the human being. But what the body is doing is always a reflection of the spirit, this respiration of spirit. And we even get this English notion of respiration based on the Latin spiritus, which first of all refers not to biological breathing, but to spiritual breathing. Even in the Genesis text, where we have God breathing life into Ha-Adam and he became a nephesh, a living being. This is, first of all, an act of spirit, not just biological evolution, even though, of course, biological evolution is involved in the transformation of various forms of biological organisms. But the breathing of life into the other is an act of love, it's an act of freedom. It is a matter of gift and not determinism. And God breathes the soul directly into the human being upon conception of the material aspects of the being, which always are spiritual because they always are formal. There's form in relation to the matter. So Stein, along with Hedwig Conrad Martius here, talking about Geisten in relation to Leiben, the spiriting in relation to the bodying of the living being, this vital participation in fully unfolded being. This mode of existing that Hedwig Conrad Martius calls vital participation signifies the gift of life that is enacted when one person gives herself over for another. This is a free and intentional giving, not abusively coerced or forced. And this is why authentic acts of love overcome the hermeneutics of suspicion and the psychology of determinism. Because in an act of love, it can't be credited to a natural urge alone. And in the most radical forms, say when one person gives up his life for the other, willfully, intentionally, uh, self-consciously, this exceeds the determinisms of nature, and it gives evidence of the supernatural in man. Evidence of the supernatural are these acts of love, both heroic and unheroic, but both large and small. Even in the ordinariness, we have ample evidence of spirit, of love. What family life can be when every member of this living unit we call the family lives according to the pattern of self-donation on a daily basis through the rhythms of ordinariness. Carol Houselander is a wonderful author on this. Her book, The Infant of the Passion Christ. Maybe I'll do a live stream on that sometime in the future. But if you haven't read this book, it's an amazing book, The Passion of the Infant Christ. It's very easy to read, very powerful. So she gets at this also. Conrad Martius identifies this kind of life in the spirit as supra-earthly, what I just said, supernatural, in the realm of fully unfolded being, abiding in the realm of perfect selfless lightness and brightness, selflessness, lightness, brightness. The glory of spirit. We read in 2 Corinthians, St. Paul says, where the spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. The glory of freedom, a kind of radiation of spirit. Spirit exhaling itself in the direction of the other, to serve the other in love, and inhaling the lived experience of the other through the act of empathy. And the inhalation of spirit is the bodying forth of the spiritual subject. At the same time, the purpose of the body is to express the soul, the meaning of the body, its peculiar configuration as God designed it. what Spanish theologian Jose Gonzalez Granados, Jose Granados talks about in his book on an introduction to sacramental theology as a cruciform shape, the human body. Why are we built this way? Why is our architecture the way it is? Why do we have, head, torso, arms, legs? It's a cruciform pattern that is revealed in its fullness and perfection in the God-man crucified, the highest expression of love, the most ecstatic and transcendent movement of spirit, because at the same time so immanent and intimate with the beloved. And we too can emulate the cruciform in our daily living, not just in moments of heroism, but in daily living, to understand the form of our bodies is what it is for the sake of this common vocation of self-giving, of living in responsibility one for the other, and thereby we become fully alive and enjoy this vital participation in the realm of fully unfolded being, having the experience of selflessness, lightness, brightness. This we experience, this we get to taste through belief in God, by becoming disciples of the God-man, Jesus, the Christ. Our hearts burn within us. We know what Cleopas and the unnamed disciple meant when they said, "Were not our hearts burning within us?" when the resurrected Christ walked with them along the road to Emmaus. We not only wonder, what do they mean by this, but we experience it for ourselves in a perpetual Pentecost of this realm of fully unfolded being. This is evangelization. We share the goodness we have received. We testify it in our real lives. Love is the evidence of love. And it's not just a tautology. Love is the best evidence of love. Love incarnate. Love with a face and a name. And we get to participate in this vitality of love. And once we experience this, we realize this is the meaning of life, and I don't want to depart from this. And when I begin to depart from it through sin, I say, no, I need to turn from my sins and come back to the point. This kind of existence indeed defies the worldly logic of commerce, typical commerce, utilitarianism, exploitation, namely a what's in it for me mentality. Conrad Martius' employment of the metaphorical terms lightness and brightness suggests the radiance and luminosity of spiritual life that shines to the degree that it gives itself away, just like the stars. Spiritual being is intellectually and emotively translucent to interpersonal relationships, sense data, and intellectual objects such as meanings, ideas, concepts, numbers, geometric shapes, and cognitive signification. It is a pattern of being observable in the non-personal natural order as well. Again, for example, celestial luminaries share their light to the measure that they expend their energy and material being. Stars light up the nighttime sky at the price of their subsistent being along specific spatial coordinates. Stars shine to the level that they die. As applied to personal spiritual creatures, this is a supra-earthly way of being, inasmuch as concern for self-preservation of the individual is displaced by concern for the welfare of the other person who faces me. Through this process of personal dispossession, I become a self in relation to the other. It's a great paradox. Once I relinquish all of this self-concern, I actually become one, a self. My resources and my very being are unfolded and emptied outward for the sake of the other, this Geisten, this exhalation of spirit, emptied for the sake of the other, with a very disinterested intentionality. There's no hidden self-interest here that dominates the movement. I love the other to the degree that I'm forgetting about myself. I'm concerned with the other in as much as I'm ceding self-concern. The Christian Testament refers to this movement as agape, love, self-giving love, and self-emptying, kenosis. Self-donation is symbolized by the cross, which stands as witness to the demanifestation of a worldly presence in favor of a presence of absence that can be called properly spiritual being. I'm going to build on this in the next live stream, but I'll end this there for now. The presence of absence we call spirit, vis-a-vis material being. What do we mean by material being? A presence of the matter, can't deny it. There it is, I make contact with it in and through my body. But what is the presence of spirit in relation to matter? It's not the presence of matter, but the presence of the absence of matter. And instead we have the presence of spirit, upon which matter itself depends. But for matter, in relation to matter, we would say spirit is absent in the relation to the presence of matter in terms of what it is. It's precisely not matter. So it's materially absent. Spiritual being is absence of matter in its essence. But what it is, we can talk about as a presence of absence, an active absenting of matter through the giving of matter, the sharing of matter, which is the activity of spirit. And the demonstration, the evidence of spirit. Thank you so much for joining me on this live stream today. Again, taking commentary from my 2017 book, Human and Divine Being, a study on the theological anthropology of Edith Stein. May we all continue to think toward the whole, to pray from the heart, and to live as a witness. We'll see you in the next one.